The Widow's Tattered Book by Walker Sweet. Paula gingerly set the hot tea on the side table, pulled a blanket over her legs, and sank into her overstuffed chair. She pulled the chain on the antique lamp. A cone of warm light bloomed, lighting the dark corner of her study. Fire crackled in her stone fireplace, the perfect reading atmosphere. She opened the frayed book at the bookmark and turned to Chapter 6. Rudolph studied the woman, a gorgeous, rich, middle-aged widow. Another man had caught her eye tonight, but no matter. He would be essential to her life soon enough. Build trust. The relationship would follow. Then isolate her from family. The estate always came last. The pattern never failed. The other man walked off to the restroom or somewhere. Made no difference. He would never see this woman again. Rudolph walked over and stood next to her at the bar. Rudolph dropped a business card on the bar top, tapped it with his index finger, and slid it over to the woman. He stopped next to her drink and pulled his hand back, leaving the card behind. She gave him a practiced, disinterested glance. Rudolph said nothing but nodded slightly at the card. She shook her head as she'd surely done hundreds of times before to would-be suitors. But some feeling, some gut instinct compelled her to glance at the card, written in red ink and blocked letters. "I know who killed your husband." Tears welled in her eyes. When the man returned from the restroom, the widow was long gone. Rudolph was a master at his craft. Outside her study, the wind raged, and rain bashed against the windows. With complete focus, Paula took no notice. She could recite every chapter word for word. She gobbled up Chapter 7, devoured Chapter 8. By Chapter 9, Rudolph had moved in with the woman. It had been a long time since this woman trusted and loved a man like she did Rudolph. The room faded as Paula sank into the story. By the time Rudolph poured wine as the woman prepared dinner, Paula could almost smell the steak sizzling in their skillet and the cake baking in the oven. Intoxicating hints at delicious smells. Chapter 10. Rudolph escorted his lady to a sold-out classical music performance in an absolutely stunning theater. Paula felt so immersed in the story that she could hear the words inside her head without actually reading them. She rubbed the plastic-coated bookmark absently. Her eyelids sank, and the story continued to play out in her ears, sight unseen. The concert was over now, and the crowd made their way to the exits. Paula's senses sharpened. She could see the story unfolding around her, the rustle of the people as they walked, the smell of perfume and cologne. And then, as if responding to an unseen force pulling her, she was in the crowd, walking out of the theater with the rest of the excited and gabbing audience. Rudolph and his date were several yards ahead of her as they ambled arm in arm through the ornately designed theater lobby. A moment before walking through the sweeping archway of the exit, Rudolph seemed to deliberately slow his gait. He turned his head to look back through the oncoming crowd and caught her eye. Rudolph glared at her intensely for a few brief moments. "He knows I don't belong here," she thought. Still in her hand, she squeezed the old bookmark as the thought of discovery jarred Paula's eyes open. No longer in the theater, she sat bundled beneath her blanket again, deep in her easy chair. She finally noticed the storm slapping fat raindrops against her window. But even safely back in her study, that stare still burned through her. He somehow knew I was there. Another thought, far more concerning. How? She'd immersed herself that deep more than once, and she'd blended into the background every time, an unnoticed extra in the story. Rudolph had never so much as glanced her way before, not even a single hint of recognition. For that matter, no one else had either. Paula took a sip of her now cold tea and pondered. The immersion in the book was her addiction, her alcohol, her drug, her nightly binge. It had to be a fluke. Holy shit! He was looking at someone behind me, she thought. That idea took root. It made sense. Simple, logical sense. More sense than Rudolph staring right into her eyes. The book never described him stopping or turning around at that moment. It could not happen. Laws of an author-character relationship governed these things. Characters did not deviate from the intention of their author. Period. Another sip of cold tea. With that comforting thought, she snuggled back down into the chair and flipped to chapter 11. Rudolph proposed. The woman accepted. By chapter 12, guests were filing into the wedding at a chateau outside of town. Paula's focus deepened. The bookmark secure in her front pocket, she closed her eyes and sank into the story, feeling it, craving it. Soon the story seemed to reach for her again, and she was in the crowd of well-dressed wedding guests making their way to the chapel. Moments after her immersion, Rudolph appeared beside her. "Bride or groom side?" he snarled quietly into her ear. He ignored her stunned look and took her arm at the elbow. "If you go, I go." Paula reached up to her chest, brushing her shirt pocket as her concentration shattered. She felt the scene slipping from her grasp. She opened her eyes and once again settled in her cozy chair. Rain still pounded against the tall window. Her fire still burned, and her lamp still sprayed soft light through its stained glass shade. But even now, she could feel the tightening grip of Rudolph's hand clenching her elbow. She looked at him with abject horror in her eyes. He examined the room, but his grip never loosened. She tried to pull away, knocking her tea to the floor, but his fingers felt like iron bars wrapped around her flesh. Rudolph finally shifted his gaze to her. Before he backhand slapped her, he muttered 4 little words. "I like your house." Smack! She landed on her back next to the fallen mug. The book made its landing splayed open on the floor beside her and the mug. Every inch of her face stung. Paula waited for Rudolph to pounce on her, but instead, he turned and walked in the opposite direction toward the large stone fireplace. He grabbed a heavy steel poker, testing its weight, slicing the air like a maniacal symphony conductor. He turned back to Paula and grinned. His pearl-white teeth gleamed in the lamplight. Thunder rumbled outside, and a flash of lightning briefly brightened the room. "I mean, I really like this house." The toothy smile eased. "I think I'll take it." Rudolph pointed the poker at Paula and proceeded to walk casually toward her, still examining the room, absorbing each and every expensive item. She could see that he was enjoying himself. Cowering in the tea puddle on the floor, she grabbed her book. She still felt the sting of his knuckles on her cheek. She shoved the fear aside. Immersion usually took time. Now she had seconds. Rudolph was 2 steps away, the poker 3 feet from her face. Paula glanced at the open page. No time to find any specific scene. She read a few words and recognized chapter 18 immediately. She shut her eyes tight, bringing her hands against her chest, and pictured the scene she'd read dozens of times and visited nearly as often. She vanished just as the poker pierced the air where her head had been. Chapter 18. Independence Day Celebrations. Rudolph would kill his wife tonight. At least he would have, if the plot hadn't changed. Paula focused everything on staying inside the story. Rudolph would not be at the fireworks celebration to kill anyone here tonight. He was busy appraising everything in her house. Paula recognized the street she was on. As the first fireworks exploded high above the town, she started to run. At the drugstore, she turned left, sprinting now, even though the street was crowded. Every other time she immersed, she'd blended in, attracted no attention. That was over. Now, she careened through the crowd like a pinball. Her destination was in sight, and she leapt up the steps and burst through the double doors. "Officers!" she yelled as she ran further into the town's police station. Startled, police officers jumped up and headed toward her. Paula's suspicion paid off as she approached the missing person board. Officers collapsed around her as she reached it. She pointed at the board. Rudolph's face stared back. Handsome, composed, missing since Chapter 12. As the closest officer reached for her, she yelled, "I know where Rudolph is." "Let her go," she heard a gruff voice say. Through the uniformed officers, an older cop pushed his way forward. "Why, so tell me, ma'am," he said calmly, "where might Rudolph be?" "First, hear me out, please, Chief Rankin," said Paula, breathing hard from the exertion and excitement. Rankin jerked at the mention of his name. "How did you—" Paula held up her hand. Rankin stopped. She let her breath settle, then spoke. "Shirley Hopewell, Francie Jackson, Ella Franklin." Rankin's eyes widened. Paula continued. "Same pattern. He targets rich, lonely widows. He gains their trust by telling them something they need to know. Sometimes he sets them up for months before he makes his move. He charms them. They fall for him, let him into their lives. Once he gains access to their finances, they eventually have an accident." Chief Rankin sat heavily on the closest desk. "Lady, just how in the raging hell do you know any of this?" "Chief, Rudolph's not missing. He's running. He's the serial killer you've been seeking for years." "If I'm not mistaken, lady, he was also with Barbara Klein until he went missing. Another rich widow, as you put it. And she is very much alive." "I know that, Chief. Barbara is extremely lucky. But the truth is, he found a better target." "A better target? Who?" Paula gathered her courage. She knew Rankin, tough but fair. She was also aware that Rankin knew that Rudolph had ties to Shirley Hopewell. He didn't know about Francie Jackson or Ella Franklin, or that he was chasing a serial killer. She had to convince him quickly. "Me. He's at my house right now. At least I hope he's still there." "And where might that be?" "Well, Chief, that part will be hard for you to understand, to be honest." Rankin raised an eyebrow and opened his arms. "Do tell." "I'll have to show you, Chief. The good news is that it's a very short trip." "This has been a fascinating story, but we don't work like that." Paula inched toward Rankin a step at a time until she could grasp his arm. "Chief, we are running out of time. Believe me, he is in a place where he can do a lot of damage and hurt many more people." As she spoke, a searing pain tore at her spine. Another pierced her skull. Paula struggled to stand. She grabbed her heart and Rankin's arm with her other hand. In the depths of her mind, she felt her connection to the real world ripping apart. "Time to go. Now!" Paula let go of her tenuous mental grip on the story. When she opened her eyes, she and Rankin were crouched on the other side of the study, not far from Rudolph, who was frantically tearing page after page from the tattered book, stuffing them into his pockets. Rudolph staggered backward at the sudden appearance of Paula and the Chief. He grabbed the steel poker from the floor. Rankin, though utterly confused as he saw Rudolph with the weapon, rushed him. Paula dove toward the book and the torn-out pages. As the men struggled, she hurriedly examined the ripped pages. Her searing pain must have been caused by Rudolph ripping these out. She straightened out the crumpled paper quickly. Chapter 35. The Climax. When Rankin caught Rudolph, the fight continued across the room. Rudolph gained a bit of space and viciously swung the heavy poker, whacking the side of Rankin's head. The Chief collapsed to the floor. Rudolph pounced, spearing him deep through the chest. Rankin lay still with the poker jutting out of him. Paula sucked in a huge gulp of air, ready to scream. Until until she noticed there was no blood seeping from Rankin. None. And as she watched, the chief began to fade away into nothing. The poker clanged to the floor, no body left to hold it upright. And suddenly, Paula knew how to stop Rudolph. The atomic bomb. A huge sacrifice, to be sure, but what was created before could be created again. Rudolph focused on Paula now, taking a step toward her, but hesitated when he noticed the look on her face. He glanced down at where Rankin had just been laying, and he understood. His face whitened. So close, he thought. He grabbed another handful of the book's pages that he had ripped out and bolted out the study door, shoving them into his pockets as he ran. Rudolph raced through the hall, past the family pictures dotted across the walls, through the den, and finally escaped from the large house, crashing out of the front door and into the storm. Paula calmly waited at the window of the study until she saw Rudolph sprinting through the rain. Paula walked back to her huge stone fireplace and tossed her beloved story into the fire. She settled back into her comfortable chair and wrapped her blanket back over her legs. She took a deep breath and leaned her head against the cushioned chair and watched the worn pages of her book burn. Rudolph raced to the end of the long brick driveway. As he burst into the street, enough of the pages that featured him turned to ash. In mid-stride, he faded into nothing. Rudolph appeared abruptly back in front of the chapel. The crowd had long disappeared. In a blink, he knew where he had to go and who he had to see. He started sprinting toward the police station. Rankin would no doubt be overjoyed to see him. Back in the study, Paula eased into the recliner, took a steadying breath, and let the tension drain. For a while, she simply sat, thinking, silent, still. Characters do not deviate from the direction of their author. Her last thought before her eyelids finally gave way to sleep comforted her deeply. I'll go back in the morning to check on things. Rudolph, handcuffed moments after he'd burst into the police station, sat across from Chief Rankin's desk. Rankin stood towering over him, red from anger. Chief, I only killed you because I knew you wouldn't die. I knew you would come back here. Rankin looked well beyond skeptical. That sounds like the bullshit you tell the widows. The bullshit I tell the widows is all in the script she wrote. I must do that just as much as you must work in the police station. Just as much as I must get married over and over. And far worse. She is the puppet master. The chief's skeptical look had hardened. His grizzled voice held no mercy. I don't even know where I was when you attacked me. 15 minutes ago, for shit's sake. You're under arrest for charges I haven't even thought of yet. Rudolph calmly lowered his voice a bit. Chief, I know where you were 15 minutes ago. She's still there. Before we get to that, I would ask you, respectfully, to reach into my pockets and remove the pages of her manuscript that I grabbed when I ran out of that house. The chief's voice softened a degree. Maybe two. From the book you were tearing apart when I, arrived there. That's the one, Chief. The chief simply stared down at Rudolph for a solid minute. Rudolph accepted his gaze and returned it with quiet confidence. Finally, the chief reached down and pulled every page out of both pockets. I would ask that you read any of them, Chief, or even read them all. Just remember, those words are hers. The chief eased behind his desk, still unsure whether he was being played. Even so, he flattened one of the crumpled pages. And with one more glance at Rudolph, whose expression had not altered at all, he began to read. After the first page, he uncrumpled another and read, then another. After the first 3 pages, he ordered one of his deputies to remove the cuffs from Rudolph's wrists. And the chief kept reading. After 2 more pages, he gave more instructions to his deputies before he turned back to read more. Finally, he looked up at the man still waiting. Calm, unreadable. "Okay, Rudolph, let's talk." Paula woke up the next morning feeling like a victor. Once she finished her morning routine, she made her way to the study, marching straight to the bookshelf. Her second and last copy of the book, weathered a bit less than the first, waited in its designated spot. She slid it lovingly from its perch. "Don't worry, my friend. I'll replace your twin soon enough," she said to herself as much as the book. The sacrifice had to be made, unfortunately. She scooted deep into her chair, gripped her bookmark tight, and opened the story back to chapter 18. The morning Independence Day parade. Paula loved parades. A sunny, pleasant morning. The crowds gathered on either side of the main street, waiting for the floats to cruise by. An airplane with a banner trailing behind flew overhead, kids bouncing up and down in anticipation. All as she had written. Beautiful. Paula focused hard on the words as they became a bit blurry. She eased her eyes closed, and when they opened again, she was there. The sidewalk on Main Street, not far from the police station, teemed with the townspeople and lawn chairs. Older kids wandered together in batches. The floats would start their journey soon. No one even noticed her. The storefront where she stood had more decoration than expected, though. Slightly odd. Probably a tiny difference in the two copies of the book, she thought. Then she looked at the decorations a bit closer. These weren't decorations at all. She instantly recognized a page from chapter 3, then a page from chapter 7, both taped to the store window. What the hell? Paula looked around again in shock. She hadn't seen it at first, but now her pages were everywhere, stapled to poles, taped to storefronts. She gasped and grabbed her bookmark tight as she realized something even more shocking. Everyone in the crowd had now turned to gaze directly at her, eyeing her every move. A teenage boy started shouting, "It's her! It's her! She's here! She's here!" His friend leaped towards her, and one of them grabbed her wrist, while another ripped the bookmark out of her hand. Paula tried to stop them, but the crowd surged forward to block her way. They quickly surrounded her. Then, as if coached, together the herd began to walk toward the police station. Paula, encircled tightly, had no choice but to walk within the raucous crowd, most of whom were yelling and gesturing and waving yet more copied pages of her book at her. As they finally reached the police station, the dense crowd surrounding her opened between Paula and the door. Chief Rankin stepped out to greet her. The teen who had wrestled away her bookmark leapt up to the chief and eagerly handed it to him. After patting the boy on the shoulder, Rankin lifted it up in front of his face and stared at it. Rudolph had been telling the truth, he thought, as he peered at the man's driver's license, the talisman she used to imprison him and to immerse herself. Finally, he looked at Paula, still trapped among the hurriedly deputized townspeople. She had turned white with fear and fury. Behind Rankin, Rudolph stepped out of the station and stood next to him. Still watching Paula, the chief handed Rudolph the license. "It appears this belongs to you." "Thank you, Chief Rankin." The sudden primal scream from Paula surprised the people surrounding her. "Fuck you, Rudolph!" Rudolph paid no attention to her and turned back toward the station. He took a deep breath, walked forward, and before he reached the doorway, he faded into the morning air. "It's mine! Come back here, you bastard!" Chief Rankin stepped forward and grabbed her arm. "Such profane language from such a renowned author. Come inside to your new home." Back home, Rudolph tried to rest, to shed his mind of the last year of hell. Slowly, he began to relax and think. Then he returned to the study, started a fire in the grand fireplace, and sat down to wait. Later, after the crowd at the station dispersed, Paula sat alone in the jail cell. Finally, some silence, she thought. Every one of them will cease to exist once I edit the book. The thought brought her a small manner of comfort. The talisman was gone. It had greased the skids. She had immersed and returned so many times she could do it without it. Maybe, hopefully, if she could just focus hard enough. The real remaining talisman was still back in her study. She closed her bloodshot eyes. Even with her eyes shut, the fireplace's smoky scent lifted her spirits. Wrongs would be right again. She was home. She opened her eyes and looked around the dark room, and relief washed over her. A deep breath to take in the smell of home. Across the room, the fireplace roared. Such a welcome sight. The back of her chair facing away from the fire as usual. Everything still in its place. The lamp was off. Perfect. The fire provided enough dancing light to see. Staying as silent as possible, she began to look for the real talisman, the real magic, the book. Where's my book? She thought. As she began to search the room, a shadowy figure rose from the front of her beloved chair. That's when she noticed why the fire was roaring so, because of all the paper Rudolph had fed to the flames. Her sacred pages roasting in front of her eyes. Paula jumped toward the fireplace. Rudolph held up something and she stopped at once, her knees buckling as she stared at it. Her eyes adjusted to the firelight, enough to recognize what Rudolph now gestured towards the raging blaze. The cover to the final copy of her masterpiece. An anguished howl escaped from deep within. "No! You Black Widow bitch! Get out of my house!" barked Rudolph. And with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the cover into the meat of the fire. Paula lunged for the flames, but before she reached the hearth, she felt herself thinning, and she knew. One more doleful howl as she faded away. No! And then silence, but for the crackling flames. As the cover burned, the title and author, A Witch's Game by Paula Thorne, blackened and fell to ashes with the rest of the spell. As the fire continued to burn, Rudolph walked out to his family pictures that Paula thankfully never bothered tossing out. He stood rigid, staring at his favorite photo. His beloved dead wife is a grinning bride, forever young in this shot. One picture frame over, another woman smiling. Years after his wife's accidental death, meeting her at his loneliest had been so exciting at first. Smart and beautiful, an aspiring author. Never published, but she'd hand-bound 2 copies of her book. Rudolph lifted the framed photograph off the wall and walked back into his study with a renewed sense of calm. Without hesitation, he tossed the witch into the flames to burn with her cursed book. Back in jail, Paula seethed silently as she lay on her back against the cold concrete cell floor. In the morning, she would attempt to work up a sweet smile and ask politely for a pen and a stack of paper. Staring at the dirty gray cell ceiling, she began to practice that smile. One after another, after another, after another.